Montana Territory, July 1872. The storm broke just after sunset, drenching the plains outside Helena in a hard, fast rain that turned dirt roads to mud and carved gullies into the hills. Raymond Beck pulled hard on his reins, his horse slick with sweat and rain, the wind slapping the brim of his hat. He had seen smoke, thin and rising crooked from the chimney of a broken-down log house nestled against the cottonwoods near the creek. It was the first sign of life he had seen in 2 days. He did not expect to find a woman on the porch clutching a baby to her chest, her dress soaked and clinging to her knees. She held a rifle across her lap. Raymond dismounted slowly, his boots sinking into the wet earth. "Ma'am," he said, voice steady, "I mean no harm. Just lookin' for shelter from the storm." The woman's grip on the rifle did not loosen. The baby whimpered and she shifted her weight, rocking gently as her eyes searched his face. "You alone?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am, name's Raymond Beck. Been driving cattle east, lost the herd in the hills." "Just me now?" She hesitated, then lowered the rifle slightly. "You can come inside, but do not make me regret it," he nodded. "Fair enough." Inside, the cabin smelled of smoke and old pine, the roof leaked in the corner and the hearth was down to embers. The woman knelt quickly, placing her baby in a cradle fashioned out of a wooden crate lined with blankets. She worked a little fire back to life with practiced hands. "I am Mariah Ellison," she said without looking at him. "This is my son, Kellen. He is 3 months today." Raymond removed his coat and hung it near the door. "You live out here alone?" "My husband, Thomas, was killed in May. He went out to check the traps and never came back. I found him 2 days later with a bullet in his back." "No one to chase after?" She looked up at him then, her eyes tired but strong. "I stayed because I had nowhere else to go," he swallowed. "I am sorry." She gave a small nod, as if she had heard the words often but they no longer carried weight. They sat across from each other while the rain hammered the roof. Kellen stirred and began to fuss. Mariah lifted him gently, cradling him to her shoulder. Her hand moved in circles on his back. In the low firelight, Raymond saw how young she looked, no more than 20, yet worn by grief and survival. "Do you plan on staying long?" she asked after a moment. "I can help with whatever needs doing tomorrow if you will have me. Then I will be on my way." Mariah did not answer right away. She wrapped the baby tighter in the blanket and sat back down. "There is a barn out back. It is not much, but it is dry." "Thank you." The next morning, Raymond rose with the sun. He fed the chickens, mended a broken fence, and split a stack of firewood. Mariah watched him from the porch, Kellen resting against her hip. "Do you know how to fix a roof?" she asked. He looked up, wiping sweat from his brow. "I do." A week passed, then 2. Raymond made no mention of leaving, and Mariah never asked. He repaired the roof, dug a new well line, and even built a swing for Kellen from a length of rope and a plank of wood. The baby laughed when Raymond pushed him gently, legs kicking at the air. One hot afternoon, Mariah brought him water at the edge of the field. Raymond took it, drank deep, and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "I figure you have done more for us in 3 weeks than anyone has in my whole life," she said. Raymond looked at her, eyes steady. "I do not do it for thanks." "Then why?" He glanced toward the cabin where Kellen's little head peeked from the window. "Because I can, because I want to." That night, after putting Kellen to sleep, Mariah found Raymond sitting behind the barn, watching the moon rise over the hills. She sat beside him without a word. They watched the stars in silence, their shoulders almost touching. "You never did say what you are running from," she said. He looked down at his hands. "Nothing I am proud of." "My father used to say a man does not outrun his past, he just learns to walk straighter going forward." Mariah nodded. "I do not care what you were, I care what you are." A long pause passed between them. "I lost 2 boys last winter," Raymond said quietly. "My wife left me 5 years ago. Said I was too quiet, too slow to show things. I buried my sons in Wyoming and I have not been back since." Mariah's hand slid across the space between them and rested on his. "I am sorry, Raymond," she whispered. He turned to her, his voice thick. I see Kellen and I remember what it felt like to hold my boys, and when I look at you. He hesitated, then said softly, I want to be the man he will call Pa. Mariah leaned in, her forehead resting against his. You already are. They stayed like that for a long while, no need for more words. The next morning, Raymond rose early, but this time he was not alone. Mariah stood beside him, her hand tucked into his. Kellen gurgled happily in her other arm. The wind had shifted. The land felt different. He had never planned to stay. But now he could not imagine leaving. By late August, the grasses along the creek had turned gold, and the cottonwoods rattled with the dry hush of nearing fall. Raymond stood in the shade of the barn, watching Mariah kneel beside a washbasin, scrubbing Kellen's clothes with short, practiced strokes. The baby lay nearby on a folded quilt, squinting at the sky and waving his fists. Raymond stepped forward, brushing hay off his sleeves. There's a team of elk crossing the ridge trail. Could bring one down easy enough. Mariah wrung out a shirt and reached for a pair of trousers. You think we'll need the meat before snow? More mouths come winter, he said, glancing toward the cabin. You, me, him. It's a different count now. Her hands paused in the water. I suppose it is. He crouched beside the quilt and picked up a carved wooden horse he'd whittled 2 nights back. Kellen grabbed it in both fists and tried to gum the head. Raymond chuckled low in his throat. Mariah looked over, elbow resting on her knee. I've been thinking about the land east of that birch grove. Soil's softer there, might take to potatoes. Raymond nodded. Could fence it off this week. You'd need seed come spring. I'll trade for it in town. I've some jars of plum preserves put up. The shopkeeper's wife always liked those. He studied her as she dipped the last of the laundry into the basin. Her sleeves were rolled back, arms speckled with freckles the sun had brought out. Her hair was pinned up loose today, a few strands sticking to her neck. He had come here soaked to the bone, expecting only shelter. Now he found himself measuring the land in seasons, imagining furrows and rows and the shape of her beside him through them all. That evening they sat on the cabin step after supper, the sky deepening from rose to dusky blue. Kellen slept inside, the door left open a few inches to hear him stir if he did. Crickets had begun their slow chorus, and across the creek, a single owl called out. Mariah pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. You ever think of marrying again? Raymond rested his forearms on his knees. I did, once after Wyoming, but I'd buried too much by then, couldn't offer anyone what they wanted. She didn't answer at first. Then quiet but sure, she said, you offer more than most men I've known, not with words, with your doing. He turned his head toward her. Would it matter to you what I was before? I only care who you are with me. With him? Raymond looked out across the pasture where a pale moon was rising over the hills. I've never asked for much, never thought I deserved more than quiet and distance, but this place, you, him, it's the first time I've wanted to stay still. Mariah's voice was steady. Then stay. He reached over, his hand finding hers, calloused palm against her fingers worn by washboards and worry. She didn't pull away. They sat that way until the stars came out in full, until the wind shifted and the air cooled. In the days that followed, they worked side by side. Mariah began teaching Raymond how she preserved peaches, how to test the syrup's thickness by feel instead of sight. He showed her how to mend a saddle strap, and together, they patched the roof of the chicken coop after a raccoon had torn through it. Kellen's laugh grew louder, fuller, and he had taken to grabbing Raymond's beard whenever he came close. One morning, Raymond found Mariah at the edge of the grove, studying the soil with a small spade. He carried a bundle of fencing stakes over one shoulder. I was thinking, she said, not looking up, we could build a lean-to here, somewhere dry for tools, maybe a place for him to play when he's older. He set the stakes down. And what would you need to build that? She glanced at him. A man who knows how to square timber. And someone who means to stick around. He stepped closer, the morning sun behind him. I want to be the man he'll call Pa, he said softly, steady as the earth beneath them, not just in name, in everything. Mariah rose slowly, her gaze held his. You already are, she said. She reached up then, fingers brushing his jaw, and he leaned down. Their kiss was quiet, not rushed, not searching. Just two people finding their way into something solid and good. Behind them, a breeze swept through the trees, scattering yellow leaves across the soil where their life was beginning to root. By the time the aspens faded to brass, and the wind carried the sharp edge of frost, Mariah had sewn Kellen a cap from scraps of wool Raymond brought back from a supply run into Helena. The boy wore it crooked, tugging at the ear flaps as he sat in the dirt with a pine cone clutched in each hand, babbling to himself. Raymond leaned against the fence he'd built back in August, watching the child with a quiet fondness that had come to settle in him with the steadiness of sunrise. Mariah approached from the barn, brushing seed husks from her skirts. "I found a pair of draft reins in the loft," she said. "Still good leather, just need oiling. We'll need them come spring," Raymond said. "If we mean to plow that new plot," she nodded, folding her arms as her eyes moved across the field. "I've been thinking about putting in barley. It'll hold better in dry years. We'll plant whatever you say." He turned to her, brushing a curl from her cheek without thinking. "I trust your way of seeing ahead." Mariah looked at him, her voice low. "You ever think about building on to the cabin, just a room or two? There's not much space with a growing boy." His answer came without hesitation. "I'll draw it out tonight." "I've seen how the roofline could stretch." She watched Kellen for a moment, then said, "I've never known a man who made plans with me in them." Raymond didn't speak right away. He looked toward the horizon where the mountains stood washed in pale light. "I don't have much left from before. But what I have now, I'd put into this place. Into you both." Mariah reached for his hand, resting her fingers over his knuckles. Later that week, they walked the edge of the pasture together, marking where the new fencing would run come spring. Kellen rode on Raymond's hip, one small fist tangled in the collar of his shirt. The boy had taken to him without hesitation, reaching for him in the mornings and settling against his chest when the wind came sharp. "Did your boys look like him?" Mariah asked, her voice gentle. Raymond's jaw shifted, but he nodded. "One had my eyes, the other his mother's temper. I don't talk about them much, not because I forget, because I remember too well." Mariah looked up at him. "You don't have to speak of them if it hurts." "I want to," he said. "Not today." "But I want to." They turned back toward the cabin. Smoke curled slow from the chimney, and the scent of dried sage clung to the air. That night, after Kellen had fallen asleep with one fist wrapped around a button on his blanket, Raymond brought in a crate of salvaged boards he'd kept stacked behind the barn. He laid each piece out near the stove, inspecting the grain. "What are you building?" Mariah asked. "A cradle," he said. "One Kellen won't outgrow by spring." She tilted her head. "He'll be walking by then. Then I'll build him a stool." Mariah smiled softly. "You think like a man who plans to stay. I am a man who's already stayed." They fell into a rhythm that settled around them like a well-worn quilt. Days passed with the sound of hammers and saws, the scent of stew on the hearth, and Kellen's growing laughter filling the gaps between their silences. Evenings were quieter, Mariah stitching by lamplight, Raymond sanding wood smooth beneath his fingers. One night, as they lay awake with Kellen nestled between them, Mariah whispered, "I used to pray for a man who'd stay through the cold months." Raymond turned toward her, his voice thick with sleep and truth. "I used to pray for a place that felt like belonging." She reached across the child and rested her hand on his chest. "You found it." His fingers curled around hers. "So did you." Snow came in early October, blanketing the hills in silence. The cabin held strong, its seams sealed tight with fresh pitch. Raymond bent his back to the work without complaint, hauling in wood, tending the stove, lining the windows with quilt scraps to keep out the drafts. Mariah baked cornbread and mended socks by firelight. One morning, as blue smoke rose against the white of the world, Raymond stepped outside and saw a set of fresh deer tracks leading down toward the creek. He followed them only far enough to be sure they posed no danger, then returned to the porch to find Mariah waiting with coffee in a tin cup. Kellen watching him through the window. "I used to think I'd be alone every winter," she said. He took the cup from her hands, warming his fingers against it. "Not anymore." Mariah looked past him toward the field buried in snow. "There's a minister rides circuit through here near Christmas, stops by the schoolhouse." Raymond didn't ask what she meant. He didn't need to. "I'll speak to him," he said. "If you'd have me." She nodded, her throat working. "I would." Inside, the baby stirred and Mariah slipped back through the door, leaving it open behind her just long enough for Raymond to follow. The wind howled that night, but inside the cabin it was warm. The cradle stood near the hearth, smooth and sturdy, carved with a small horse on one end. Kellen slept soundly, his breath even. Raymond reached for Mariah's hand. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The week before Christmas, the clouds settled low and unmoving, holding the light in a way that made the days feel shorter than they were. Raymond stood by the edge of the woods, axe in hand, studying a fir tree tall enough to shelter a child's wonder but narrow enough to fit in the corner near the hearth. The tree came down with 5 clean strokes. He trimmed the lower branches and dragged it back through the snow, the weight of it trailing behind like a promise. Mariah met him at the porch with a bundle of string and a small basket of dried berries. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, and her eyes held a brightness that hadn't been there in summer. "I used to make garlands with my sister," she said, holding up the basket. "Before she married and moved to Missouri." Raymond stepped past her into the warmth of the cabin, setting the tree upright in a barrel packed with stones. "You ever see her now?" Mariah's hands paused over the string. "Not since the war. We wrote for a time, but..." "Things change." He didn't press her. Some distances couldn't be bridged by letters, and he understood that better than most. That evening they sat on the floor while Kellen dozed in a basket beside them, his arm flung over his face. Mariah threaded berries and pieces of cloth through the twine, while Raymond whittled small stars from kindling scraps. The fire cracked low, steady, and they worked in easy silence. "I'd like to write to the land office in the spring," she said after a time. "Get the homestead claim in both our names." He set down his knife. "You sure? I want Kellen to grow up knowing this place was built by both our hands." She looked at him, full in the face. "And I want your name on it." Raymond reached across the space between them, brushing his fingers against hers. "Then we'll send the papers together." Later, as the wind picked up outside, Mariah lit the last of the beeswax candles and placed it in the window. "My mother used to do that every December. Said it was for anyone out in the dark so they'd know they weren't forgotten." Raymond stood beside her, watching the flicker of light against the glass. "You think she'd be proud of you?" Mariah folded her arms across her chest. "I think she'd tell me I'm stronger than she ever was. I never thought I would be." "You are," Raymond said. "I see it every day." The circuit preacher arrived just after noon on Christmas Eve, his boots caked in snow and his coat dusted with road salt. He brought a Bible bound in cracked leather and a voice worn from years of dust and distance. Raymond had cleared a space near the hearth, and Mariah wore a dress with a blue sash stitched at the waist. Kellen clung to her skirt until Raymond lifted him into his arms and held him steady. The vows were spoken in quiet tones, the fire hissing gently behind them. Raymond's hand did not tremble when he placed the ring, a simple band he'd traded for in town, onto Mariah's finger. Her eyes never left his. After the preacher left, they sat at the table with a pie Mariah had baked from dried apples and a thin jar of honey she'd been saving. Kellen fussed until Raymond balanced him on one knee and the boy went still, his eyes wide. "He's never sat that long with anyone else," Mariah said, folding the pie cloth and setting it aside. Raymond kissed the top of the boy's head. "He knows I'm his." Mariah watched him for a long moment, then nodded once. "And we're yours." That night, with snow falling soft against the roof and Kellen asleep in his cradle, Mariah pulled Raymond's coat from the peg and stitched his name into the lining, just his first, nestled beneath the collar, where no one else would see. When she finished, she ran her fingers over the thread, slow and certain. Raymond stepped behind her, arms sliding around her waist. "You warm enough?" Mariah leaned back into him. "I've never known a winter to feel like a beginning." He pressed his mouth to her temple. "It is." They stood that way for a long time, the fire low, the quiet deep, and the snow outside falling without hurry. In the stillness, there was nothing missing, nothing held back. Only the steady beat of a life begun in hardship and grown into something whole. And in the silence, Raymond whispered what he'd known since that first hard rain. "I want to be the man he'll call Pa." Mariah turned in his arms, her voice sure. "You already are." The last of the snow melted by mid-April, leaving behind a soft dampness in the earth and the scent of pine bark waking from its long sleep. Raymond stood in the yard with his sleeves rolled and his boots sunk half an inch into the thawed soil, eyeing the line he'd marked for the barley rows. Kellen toddled a few paces behind him, careful and deliberate, his small hands reaching for balance between each wide step. He had just learned to walk the week before, and already he'd taken to shadowing Raymond across the yard like a calf to its mother. Mariah was near the shed, hanging the last of the winter quilts to air in the sun. Her hair was braided down her back, thicker now, and streaked with copper from the months outdoors. She turned when she heard Kellen's laughing grunt and called gently, "He's headed your way." Raymond knelt just in time to catch the boy before his knees gave out. He lifted him up, dirt and all, and said, "You've got his stride already, just need to teach you where to step." Mariah crossed the yard with a cloth in hand. "He'll be into everything by summer. I've been thinking we ought to build a little gate along the porch. Keep him from wandering toward the creek." "I'll cut the boards this afternoon," Raymond said, "and I'll fit the latch high. He's clever." She gave a soft sound of agreement, then touched Kellen's cheek. "He's got a mind of his own." Raymond shifted the boy onto his hip. "Just like his ma." Mariah raised her eyebrows. "Is that so? You built this home out of loss and stubbornness," he said. "That's not a fault. That's the kind of will that holds a family together." She looked at him, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then she reached out and took his free hand. "You're part of that now, not beside it." "In it?" That night, after Kellen was asleep and the last of the stew had been scraped from the pot, Mariah lit the small oil lamp on the table and opened the parcel that had come with the circuit rider the week before. She unfolded the land deed, run in thick black ink, and laid it flat. Raymond dried his hands on a cloth and stepped beside her. "The ink's barely dry," she said. He scanned the page, his name beside hers in legal script. "It's ours." Mariah tapped the corner of the paper, not just the land, the name. He looked at her. "You sure I want it?" she said. "Not because it's expected, because it means something now." He reached for her waist and drew her close, the warmth between them familiar and steady. "Then you'll have it." The next week, they cleared the birch grove to make way for the planting. Mariah had planned the rows in a small notebook, and Raymond followed her diagrams without question. They worked side by side, Kellen bundled in a wool wrap on Mariah's back, his head nestled against her shoulder as she moved through the soil. Raymond dug each furrow and turned over the earth with care, seeing not just the barley but every year after, by mid-May, green shoots had broken through the soil, and the sky softened from pewter to pale blue. The days grew longer, and Kellen began to explore the edge of the yard, often dragging a stick behind him like a plow. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the field shimmered in gold, Raymond packed away his tools and found Mariah standing at the edge of the porch. She held a folded shirt he hadn't seen before, the stitching neat and new. "It was my father's," she said, holding it out. "I kept it stored away, thought it might fit you." He took the shirt and ran his hand over the worn fabric. "You sure?" "I think he'd rather it be worn than forgotten." Raymond slipped it on, the fit snug through the shoulders. "Feels right." She stepped close, her voice low. "So does this." He leaned down and kissed her, slow and sure, the scent of sun-warmed grass around them. Her arms wound around his waist, and the quiet between them filled with the weight of everything they had built. They married again that summer, this time in the clearing behind the house, with a few neighbors standing by and Kellen tugging at a wildflower crown Mariah had placed on his head. No preacher this time, just words spoken plain and true. Raymond placed a second ring on her hand, this one carved from elk bone and polished smooth, and said only, "This is home." Mariah answered with a nod, her eyes bright, "And you are mine." The seasons turned. The barley came in strong, and they traded the surplus for flour and glass jars and a new kettle. Raymond built the gate for the porch and added a second latch just in case. Kellen said his first full sentence the following spring, something about his boots and the mud, and Raymond carried him half laughing across the yard to the pump to wash him off. Mariah taught Kellen to string beans and tie simple knots. Raymond carved him a bow from ashwood and taught him the patience it took to aim. Years passed. The cabin grew, 2 rooms added, one for Kellen, one for tools and drying herbs. A second cradle came, then a third, and Raymond built each one without complaint, smoothing the wood with the same care he gave to every task in his life with Mariah. Their hair silvered in time, but their hands never stopped finding each other across the table, across the barnyard, across the quiet hours after supper. They sat together on the bench beneath the cottonwoods, watching grown children cross the same fields they'd once plowed with bare hands and borrowed seed. On their 40th spring, Raymond planted a wildflower bed along the edge of the porch, and Mariah asked for a chair with arms wide enough for 2. He built it from oak, carved with quiet care, and placed it facing west. And every evening, as the sun dipped low and the hills turned soft with light, they sat there together, her hand in his, the scent of warm soil rising, the hum of a life well lived settling around them, nothing left to prove, nothing left to fear, only love steady and full. A home made of hands and hope and earned peace.